Well, good morning. We're in the book of 1 Peter. If you want to go and open up your Bibles and turn to 1 Peter chapter 5, that's where we're going to jump into the main lesson. We've been going through Peter, and it's an amazing book. And I tell you what, you can read the Bible, but when you're studying and you're preparing the lessons and you just start seeing so many more beautiful things that you're learning yourself, sometimes I feel like more the student than the one who's being the teacher. And I think that it's important when we think about Peter. So whenever I tell you and I say, Peter, the apostle, what do you think about? A lot of things. A lot of times people go, well, he's the one that confessed Christ. Oh, okay, well, let's qualify that. Remember, Jesus even said you didn't figure that out by yourself. The Lord God told you that. But what a qualified person to write this letters. Peter didn't write a gospel. Peter didn't write to all these churches. Peter wrote to saints, Christians, and he was extremely qualified to be able to try and express to us the wisdom that he learned the hard way, the school of hard knocks that he went through himself. And I think about that when I think about how people are so easy to give you advice on how to do certain things, and yet they have no clue. And maybe you even know they don't have a clue. For example, please don't ask me about mechanicking, okay? Don't come to me and say, hey, Ron, how do you replace a carburetor? First off, most people wouldn't even know what a carburetor is nowadays. But anyway, don't. Because I'm not that good at it. But I could not tell you that, right? Like, I'm not going to go ask Carrie how to bake a pie, because I don't know how he cooks. And if he started telling me all that, do I trust him, in other words? And I remember the impression I had as a 17-year-old kid, never traveled or flew anywhere, going to Fort Dix, New Jersey, in the Army. I was homesick the first night. I was in a weird place, and there were some weird people. I mean, we had people from Puerto Rico, from the Bronx, and then we had these instructors that just wanted to kill us. And I couldn't figure out the logic. Why are you so mean, right? I understood it. I seen the movies. I knew there's a process here. But it wasn't until later on I remember us looking at some of the insignia, the things they wore on their uniforms that they had. We didn't know what they meant. But I remember looking at my drill sergeants and thinking, what do they, how do I get one of those? And then we thought differently of them. And when one drill sergeant would hold up his fingers, he'd go, count to 10, and he'd do that. His fingers were deformed because he was a prisoner of war. And they had broke his fingers, and they didn't heal right. And I looked at them differently. And so when they spoke, we started listening, because we knew that those men that were leading us and training us knew how to get us to where we needed to be. I think this is Peter. I think when we think about what he's trying to bring across in the later years of his life, many of us, and you'll get there as well, you look at what you've experienced. You may not be wearing a combat infantry badge or something like that, but we have one that's called life, right? And we've experienced a lot of trauma in our lives. And this man, Peter, is one that has done that, lived it. And so when we think about what he's trying to bring across in the flow of this letter, he's trying to, he starts out by reminding us of who we are. Who are we? You are a holy people. You are a part of a holy nation. You have something that is so precious, that is built upon the cornerstone of Jesus Christ. And then he even says something that just hangs there, that sometimes initially we read past it, and then later on when you grow, you go, even angels wanted to see those things. That's what you are. So live it. Be strong. And he's not going to then turn the letter around and tell how precious it is. He's going to actually turn it around and talk about the difficulties you're going to face, but how to be able to focus, to stay focused. You know, if you ever have done any endurance things like long hikes or, running or anything like this where you're in challenge and trying to get a project done even that's just so overwhelming, you have to be able to see the end, don't you? You have to be able to visualize it, or otherwise you'll stop. You'll stop. It's like a puzzle to me, jigsaw puzzles. I drive me crazy. I'm too ADD. I look at it and I look at the box and I go, but if I didn't have the box, I wouldn't even do it. It's ridiculous. Because I can't see what it's supposed to be. So that's why it's important the way he starts out by saying, this is what you are. But then he keeps us focused through this letter by constantly bringing us where? Back to the cross. And reminding us, we have one who has done it. He has accomplished it. And he is the one you can look at with confidence and knowing that his victory is always before us. But it came through a cross, right? It didn't come through some sort of formal great inauguration. It came through pain, rejection, suffering, brutality, cruelty, death, burial. But it ended in resurrection, and it ended in victory. So every time, as he's going through this letter and jostling us around in a way, and helping us to try to see that, Peter knows what it's like. He knows what it's like to sit there in one moment, confess Jesus as the Son of God, and then turn around and tell him, no, you're not going to Jerusalem to suffer. And then be called by the Lord, his adversary, right? And then the night that the Lord was betrayed, Jesus looked at him and told Peter something very somber. You know what, Peter? Satan has asked for you. He wants to sift you. Doesn't that give you goosebumps? Can you imagine Peter sitting there, hearing the Lord saying, and then the Lord said, every one of you are going to run away from me. And then Peter says, not me, Lord. And then the Lord looks at him and says, you're going to do it 3 times tonight. And the third time he wept bitterly. He knows what it's like, to deny the Lord. But not like us. I mean, literally, to his face, the Lord. Tell him, rebuke the Lord. Yet the Lord loved him. And the Lord, even though when he told him that sombering message about the Satan, he told him, you need to build these guys back up. You need to encourage. You need to come back. It's going to be bitter. The Lord knew what he's going to go through. But he said, you have something you need to continue to do. And I see that in this letter. I see Peter almost crying as he's going through and thinking about what he did wrong, just like we do when we try to raise our children, right? And we know all the things we've done. And we pour our hearts into trying to help them to see, don't do what I did. And that's this letter. There was a lot of emotion that he poured into this and trying to help us. And he shows us that, one, don't find it strange you're going to suffer. Jesus told him that right after he confessed him in Mark chapter 8, when he confessed him as being the Lord and Savior, and then the Lord tells him that, and then he turns around and says, well, you're going to suffer, and I'm going to have to die. And then he says, no, you're not. He didn't get it. It took him a while. And I think in this letter, one of the things he's hoping is that you don't take that long. and not to find it strange, because he was told by the Lord himself that discipleship is going to cost you something. And not to be ashamed of it. And what's the value of it? What's the value of you being comfortable in this world and gaining the prosperity of this life, but yet you lose your soul? And it was a hard lesson for him. So as he flows through this, he comes to the point where then he helps us to see that it's us. That we also need to consider that you're not by yourself. Not only, yes, you have the cross and you can look at him, but he says it's important to know that you have brothers and sisters. He doesn't say it specifically like that, but he turns it to us and says, look, during this suffering, you need to look to your family. You need to love one another. You need to be humble with one another. You don't run from them when you're suffering and you're going through these trials. You cling to them, and we cling to you during those times. So yes, I get really upset when people say, I don't need a church to go to heaven. No, but you need one to survive this world, which means we help one another get to heaven. And that's a message he also puts in here. And then we come to this text. It's like out of nowhere, all of a sudden he starts to talk about elders. And he doesn't go into great detail, does he? And it's not a whole lot. And so you kind of wonder, it's like, there, Peter, why are you all of a sudden now you're talking about shepherds and the elders? And now it's like, well, how many of us are elders? So it's like, and it's almost like if you were an elder and you were sitting there listening to reading this letter the first time, you say, wow, that's getting personal now. Why are you picking me out as an elder? Why don't you talk about the preachers? Why don't you draw in, the deacons? But you forget the flow, see. He's shown you how to focus on the cross. He's shown us how to focus on one another. But now he talks about the importance. And he's not just talking to the elders. Because you see, you need to understand what a shepherd is. It's the cross, but you know what he's also been saying throughout it is the shepherd. The shepherd. The shepherd. Look to your shepherd. You know what sheep do? Sheep look to the shepherd, and they know their shepherd. They know his voice. And that's true. If you go to people who deal with sheep, there's a story of a man who went to Jerusalem, and he was out walking around and touring, and he saw two flocks of sheep coming over. They're going to cross each other. Shepherds were in front of each other leading, and these sheep were following behind these shepherds. And he's sitting there watching them and going, that's going to be a gaggle. What's going to happen when the flocks cross? Some of the sheep going to go over this way and some of the sheep over there, but the shepherds weren't worried about it. He said he kept watching, and they just keep coming towards each other. They're going to cross. And he's like, what's going to happen? And he said, when they crossed and the sheep went through each other, perfect. You know why? Because they knew their shepherd. And to me, that's what we have. We have the greatest shepherd there is. It's always been something very powerful to God to teach us through sheep and shepherdness and what he has done in him. He provided us the shepherd, but he also showed us in the Old Testament the importance of shepherds and the role that they played. And he gave a great responsibility to them, one in which at times they failed miserably, and he rebuked them harshly. And so he starts out in verse 1. He says, so I exhort the elders among you as fellow elder and a witness of the sufferings of Christ, as well as a partaker in the glory that is going to be revealed. Shepherd the flock of God that is among you. He didn't talk about it kind of distantly, does he? It must have been so humbling for him to be an elder. He's serving as an elder with this group. That's why he says, I exhort you as one. In other words, from elder to elder, I'm exhorting you. And you have to know that every time he thought of that word of a shepherd, he went back to the shepherd he lived with for a short period of time in his life. And that probably helped him so much as he did this, didn't he? And not only that, but he said, I witnessed the sufferings of Christ. But he doesn't leave it dark. He then says, a partaker of the glory that is going to be revealed. See, the glory in the cross is there too. And that's something he always would see, was seeing the glory that was going to be revealed. And so he tells the elders, shepherd the flock. Take care of them. You know, that's interesting because as he wrote that, I almost think about the idea of what John writes in John chapter 21. After Jesus was raised from the dead and he's walking and living those days with them. And after they eat breakfast, John 21, chapter 21, verse 15. And when they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? He said to him, yes, Lord, you know I love you. He said to him, feed my lambs. And then he said to him a second time, Simon, son of John. And he said to him, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. He said to him, tend to my sheep. And then he said to him a third time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? And he said to him, Lord, you know. And Jesus said to him, feed my sheep. Feed my sheep. I just think that this must have been kind of in his heart as he's sitting there thinking about this, how the Lord himself was entrusting him, in a sense, not necessarily saying, I'm putting you in as an elder, but the responsibility and how that he didn't quite understand. And it took him 3 times even then to finally, and he took it personal. He didn't see the greater message that was there. And so he continues on about kind of the manner of eldership. He says, let's read it together. So I exhort the elders among you as a fellow elder and a witness of the sufferings of Christ, as well as a partaker in the glory that is going to be revealed. Shepherd the flock that is among you, exercising oversight, not under compulsion, but willingly, as God would have you, not for shameful gain, but eager, not domineering over those you're in charge, but being examples to the flock. That's the problem you see with leadership. Leadership in the world, and I was an officer in the military, in the Army. I was trained to lead by the way the standards were of kind of the world, the way they expect a leader. And that is you communicated decisively, you made your standards known, and you enforced them. And if you had to, you used discipline. And if it got really bad, then you court-martialed them. And that's the way you led. Mostly, and there was a real contradiction between the styles of leadership you'd see among military officers. A lot of them would say, is it mission or men? That's what I was trained in. Now I hear they've modernized it. I don't know what it is now, and it was always mission, 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 mission over men. I couldn't deal with that. I never did buy that. I always thought, no, take care of the men. Not because I was a great Christian, but there was just something about me that felt like, well, if I take care of the men, the mission will always be done. That's not the way we see it. It's not that you can't lead like that. That's kind of what he's bringing out. It's a different one. And I, as serving as an elder now, it's been a growth, because there's a part of me inside that has that discipline side, that domineering decisiveness that wants to be that type of an elder. And it's hard not to let that come out. And so as I matured as a young man, and as I studied these qualifications and looking at and then becoming an elder, you start going, but then you quickly realize how beautiful it is to listen to the Lord, because it's different. It's not the same way you lead. And there's a charge there, isn't it? And then he, in verse 4 says, and when the chief shepherd appears, you will receive an unfading crown of glory. You know what I first heard when I read that? I'm going to get picked out in the crowd as an elder. It's going to be exposed. Now, you're motivated by two things. A lot of times we're motivated by, the glass is half full or the glass is half empty. I don't know, sometimes because I just don't see it, I'm like, oh, a crown? I don't think I can. That's a big call, for me to, that I'm going to be able to be honored enough. But he's not saying, he's saying that there's a part of that there is a judgment with it, though. But there's also some glory to it, that the Lord understands that you're shepherding. And in shepherding, there's a lot of spiritual accountability. You're not trying to maintain employment rates so that you don't have people getting fired or quitting or dying in a job or a corporation. You're talking about souls making it to heaven or not. You're talking about something that's eternal. Not just some administrative thing you do. No soul is left behind, should be the mantra of an elder. No soul is left behind. And that's a hard task because some souls will be left on the battlefield of this world, right? And so it's hard. But we as shepherds, we have a shepherd that we can look at. And then looking at the idea personally of what Peter went through, I understand it will never be a perfect way that I will be able to lead as a shepherd. It's a challenge. It's humbling. It's overwhelming. It's confusing at times. But I entrust my shepherd in trying to guide. And you are not my flock or genes. You are the Lord's, and that's the way we see it all the time. Our prayers together are, let us entrust us, Father. Thank you. But let us guide this flock of yours in a way that would be spiritually encouraging and helpful. Because it's overwhelming, and it's an important role. It's one that is needed more and more. It's sad. It breaks my heart because I see more and more churches not able to produce men that can serve as an elder. What's happening? What's happening? We don't need them? Just talk to some people that are in churches who don't have elders. It's not the same. It is not the same. And it's hard. And unfortunately, to some extreme, it becomes a church guided by committee. And if you've ever gone to business meetings, and I've been in some churches that didn't have elders, and it's not that they were a bad church. But I'm telling you, when you're guided by a committee meeting and everybody, needs to get along, there's always that one guy, There's always that one guy that's going to say, well, but I don't, and then it shuts it down. It stops. The buck's got to stop somewhere, but when you have a plurality like that, and you don't have that spiritual leadership, and that's what I'm saying, is that, you know what? Sometimes the buck stops with us as the elders, and that has to be. There are just some things that, Gene and I are not going to have the wisdom to make the decisions on everything, and we're going to make mistakes as well. But the Lord has entrusted us with the right humble spirit to make those decisions, and we will be judged for them. And that's a heavy weight. And then he talks and he ties all of us together again when he comes back to verse 5. Likewise. So now he's turned from talking directly to the elders to everyone. Likewise, you who are younger, be subject to your elders. Clothe yourselves, all of you, with humility towards one another. For God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. That's not a new concept, right? He said it before. We hear it all the time about how God opposes the proud, how that we should be humble. But this is in a personal relationship now. Now we're talking about between the elders and everyone else. and with one another. He just described, elders, you need to be humble. What does that mean, really, to you when you say, I'm humble? Do you think of, well, I'm just submissive? I'm weak? Because that's the way the world views it. It's the same way that the world would look at how elders in the congregation are guiding the flock. It's weak. It's not logical. But you see, the problem is the opposite is pride. And pride is what caused the fall of man and what keeps man away from God. Because it's the greatest attribute, characteristic trait of Satan himself. It's to make you feel that you are the most important person in a room. That every attitude and thought and opinion you have is far superior. You won't say that out loud, but in your core, you kind of think that. And so when somebody comes up that opposes your thought or your opinion, you feel your blood pressure and your heart rate just go up a little bit. Because no, they're not right. Mine's more important. I'll let him think that dumb thought, but you know what? I'm smarter on this point. And we do that. We might press it down, and not, but you know what happens? Is it comes out in the way we interact in the long term. And then we do have some that are vocal that will just come out and say it. You're wrong. But all of us have pride. It is one thing that we all have. And we all have a certain value of self-worth. And it's important to have it. Don't get me wrong, because the opposite is jello. You just go for anything. But there's a danger in feeling that somehow that my opinion or my position has a greater value than yours. Because I'm the preacher. I'm the elder. I'm the Bible class teacher. And I tell you what, I'm the dumbest man in the room a lot of times when it comes to Bible. And you say, no, Ron, you're just saying that. No, you know what? I just have always felt that way. But I've also seen people, preachers and Bible teachers, who think they know it all. And when somebody says something a little off the cuff that's a little bit weird and it doesn't fit in their little template of teaching, they rebuke them. Now, they may not come out and go, you're wrong, but they humiliate them in a way in which is not necessary. And just because it doesn't agree with you doesn't mean that they're wrong. And can you really stand that strong on what you think? How many times have you been wrong? We've all been wrong. We always have that challenge we have. And so he says, clothe yourself, all of us, in that. And so humility is something that we have to have. And so I want you to practice it in a way of, when you're talking to somebody that you may not agree with, is understand that person's opinion is extremely valuable to them, whether it's right or wrong, but give them the respect. Whether it's right or wrong, it's theirs and it's meaningful to them, okay? Because I really think that then what you'll do is you'll start to interact differently. And always think as well, I also could be wrong. Doesn't mean you have to give up on your idea, but you know what? Maybe they have something to add to yours. Maybe you'll grow from that. Oh, wow, I think that's called wisdom, right? Because we learn from each other. No matter where we're at in our journey, in our spiritual life, we learn from one another. And so as a congregation, he says, respect godly oversight. Now, most people under elders will say, well, I respect them, but I know, I was an elder all my life. And I know for years, I would see our elders do things or not do things, or, and I'd be going, what are they doing? Why aren't they taking action on this? Why aren't they doing this? And, why don't they tell us? You just kind of wonder, why is Sister so-and-so getting away with that? Well, don't the elders know that so-and-so hasn't done that or this or that? What do you want? A personnel report by the elders every Sunday? Here's a status of people who are good with God. Bob, Joe, Sue, Sally. Is that what you want? And by the way, what business is it of yours? Don't you think you ought to worry about your soul with God? Just because the elders don't give you a report on all the gossip that's going on doesn't mean they're ignorant. You'd be surprised what we know. And it doesn't mean we're not taking action. Sometimes our action takes a little while, takes some time. That's why the beauty of the plurality of elders. Gene and I are opposites, aren't we? If any of you know Gene and you know me, we're totally different. You would think. As a matter of fact, I had somebody years and years and years, I'm going to keep saying years and years and years ago, that was afraid of me serving as an elder because they thought that I was going to dominate somehow. And if you would think about it, you would almost kind of say that, yeah, Gene is so shy, he's so introverted and raw, and he's so loudmouth, and he's so opinionated, and he's so charismatic, or whatever you might think, Poor Gene, right? And we're our ages. Gene was a deacon when I was here in high school. Sorry, Gene, didn't mean to pick on you, but think about that. That freaks me out. I was baptized here when he was a deacon. And so when I started serving as an elder, I just have always been a little intimidated. There's just this honor. And then just the spiritual connection that was far greater than any personality. And there's so many times that we'll get together. We meet, like I've said, we do. We get together more than you think we do on a regular basis. And there's a lot of times we'll sit down and you think generationally, all these things that we have differences with each other, but it's fascinating that when we come together and something spiritual comes up, we're on target together. That's when I sit and go, wow. So that's something that a little bit on the inside that, I think that we need to understand. You may not like everything that the elders do. You may be diabolically opposed and not respect maybe some of the things that the elders may decide. You notice how I made that plural now? Because it's not about me. It's about the eldership. And there's a lot of times I have to be careful because it's like, well, are you preaching or are you eldering when I'm up here, right? And I think of it a lot. There's a lot of times, but it's one of the things that, you learn real quick. There's always people that are going to be some sheep that are going to grumble. They're going to think the grass could have been greener. The grass could have been more. Or why were they weeds in my grass? Why aren't they doing something? And I'm not saying don't ask. Because we have people that have concerns and they will say, did you aware of this, whatever might be going on? Maybe we didn't. Maybe we did. But we never want you to not come to us because we need to know. We need to help you. And sometimes we may just tell you, it's okay. We understand. We're doing something, have confidence. We're not going to talk about it. We're not going to give you the plan. But understand that. But receive the instructions, he says, with teachable hearts. And I think that's one of the things about the qualifications, why it's so imperative to have an elder who can teach, that can not just stand in a pulpit and teach, but it's teaching. That's one of the things. Because elders are overwatching souls that are being lost and won, saved, destroyed. And so those three things I see, in this idea of all, not just in the text here, just for time's sake, because when we get to 1 Timothy, we're going to dive deeper into elders. And I really was torn about that. But when we get to Timothy, we'll dive deeper into the qualifications, specifically in some other aspects. But right now, I'm wrapping in some things that we can see. One, we very clearly see that, like the Apostle Paul in Acts 20, when he's meeting with the elders there, he told them very clearly, guard the flock from danger. And he wasn't talking about the Romans. What'd he say? He goes on to say that even some of you elders, it's going to come from within. And if you really think about a lot of the dangerous things that come in, it's in the church. It's not the external things. Those things you can see. It's kind of like Satan. Don't you wish all sin had horns and wore a red cape? You could target identify every time. Well, that's sin. Look at the horns on it. No, that's not the way it happens, right? It's not that way. And so one of the main things is to protect the soul, protect people from that, and to feed. Make sure that the teaching is doctrinally sound. And then you have to live it. Not perfect again. And that's the other thing, is sometimes when elders would make a mistake or do certain things, I know in the past, and I know I and Gene, we make mistakes in our personal lives. It's not about perfection, but then again, Christianity isn't about perfection. But it's about living a life in which people can look up to you and say, yes. And then I roll back to that idea that why do we not have elders, and why so many churches are without elders? And I think maybe it's these three things, these three core things. But the biggest one, the first one that's the most apparent, is that model, that living it by the example that people can see that's far greater because of the responsibility. So some of the core things that he talks about as an elder is, one, be above reproach. Okay, now, Ron, I thought you said it wasn't about perfection. No, what's reproach? It means if somebody was to bring an accusation against an individual, that you'd look at him and go, that's absolutely true. Well, that's absolutely false. Why? Because you know. Not because they're perfect, but because of the fact that you understand that that person's character, that if you brought that up against them, you would know them well enough to go, no. And he goes on, within and without, in the congregation as well as in the community that which they live in. Self-controlled. There are some people that are Christians that they don't have control. They're struggling. Doesn't mean they're condemned permanently, but there are just some who don't have self-control on some things in their lives. And we need to be able to see that. A person who has self-control, somebody who is receptive, somebody not that holds hospitality parties or banquets or picnics or potlucks. That's not the hospitality this word means. It means, in other words, somebody who is receiving, somebody you could feel comfortable with walking up. There's a few men in my past that were Christians that I'd be scared to death to talk to. They weren't real hospitable. And that's not what you want in an elder. You want an elder that you would feel comfortable with, being able to go to them. And that's why that is a powerful attribute that needs to be there. Clear thinker. Not lack of alcohol minded, but somebody who is clear thinking. That you can see the logic, a demonstrated way in which they approach things that is not chaotic, but is focused and being able to do that as well. And respectable. And these are things, like I said, we're going to dive in more when we get into Timothy, but that you can respect. What does that mean? That means you can look at somebody and say that I honor them and I believe in their character, and I can have that trust in them. Gentle, not quarrelsome. There's a lot of very soft-spoken, quarrelsome people. They're just argumentative. They're just, everything you bring up is a little bit of a resistance. You feel it, they're kind of quarrelsome if you were to bring something to them. A lot of times as an elder, you just have to take it. You listen. You spend more time listening than you do preaching to them. And you got to, which means you have to be able to be approachable, to be hospitable, you have to be gentle. You can't beat sheep into obedience, right? That's not the way a good shepherd does it. They do it out of all the other things that a shepherd does for the sheep, and that's what elders as well. And so the posture, when he says about qualified elders, willingly, I thought that was interesting, not being forced to. And that's kind of one of the conversations you have with a man who's being considered. You want to know that they want to do it, that you're not forcing them into doing it. And I think that's a real problem. Sometimes, to make a person that does not want to serve as an elder, saying, look, man, we're down to one elder. We need you, man. You got to do it. It's up to you. If you don't do it, and they, okay. No, that disqualifies him. He could be, I've seen churches where men are qualified in what I believe, and yet they don't want to serve. You don't force them, because that would change and taint all the other aspects there. What's your motivation? As a lot of the leadership roles in the world that we're aware of, there's a certain prestige that comes with being in leadership roles, not shepherding. Shepherding is the most humiliating. It wasn't a job title that they went around and bragged about. I work with sheep, as a shepherd. Well, I'm a goldsmith, is shepherding animals? You live out there with those filthy animals? It's not something. You got to live again exemplary, not domineering. There's a lot of ways to be able to spiritually guide people without having to be that way totally. So the final challenge is to lead humbly under the chief shepherd as elders. Always remember, keeping that as elders in your mind, and follow humbly with the flock, not over the flock, but with their humility and your humility as a part of it. And serve humbly, willing to yield as well. And elders, we eagerly wait, because we know that there will be a day of either a crown of glory or we will be ashamed of what we've done. It's a powerful, heavy weight, but it's a powerful relationship in this idea of how do we survive a hostile world, what Peter's talking about. And we don't do it alone. We have to do things and love each other and cling to one another, but we also have to understand that there is a part where the Lord has blessed us with this position of giving us shepherds like him that are emulating, hopefully, like he is. And sometimes, just like what the real shepherd had to do to Peter himself, had to rebuke him, had to correct him. But you know what? He always loved him, didn't he? He even washed his feet. And that's the attitude we should have. So that's the text this morning. I hope that if you're here this morning, if there's some issue that you have in your life, if you're having a struggle, this is the time, this is the place, this is the family to open up and to share with and to grow with and to cling to. And if you're not a Christian, I hope that you would consider your relationship and what the permanency of your destiny is going to be and the power that we have in the blood of Christ. And if you believe that Jesus Christ is the Lord and our Savior and God, then act the way that we see in the New Testament, that once they believed and understood, they decided to change their lives, but they also understood, as Peter said, you need to change your life, but also repent and be baptized, each one of you, in order to do what? Receive forgiveness of sin. And then that brings you into this beautiful relationship that Christians have. If there's anything else we can do to help you this morning, let us know while we stand and sing.